So we switch now to Sam Belknap, Samuel Belknap III, to give him his full handle, who is in Damariscotta, Maine, and whose first cousin is an actress in CSI New York. And he's going to tell us about the great work he's doing there as a fisherman and anthropologist. And welcome, Sam. Floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Michael. And thanks all involved in the Udras for extending the invitation across the Atlantic so I could join today. Let me just make sure that everyone can see. Is everyone seeing that? Wonderful, excellent. So Claudia mentioned punching above your weight, and I feel like I'm doing a bit of that myself with the impressive list of speakers that we've put out before me. And I'm going to do my best to share some of the work we're doing here. And I just want to say, I'm going to bring us back to community a little bit and speak to some of the points that Mark kicked off the day with. So first, I'm Sam Belknap. I'm a senior community development officer here at the Island Institute in Maine. And my earbud just dropped out. Can you all hear me?
You're fine. Yes, we can hear you. We're good.
Excellent. Excellent. Good to know. So I oversee the Island Institute's marine economy and climate pilots work. And it connects deeply to my passion and support for Maine's coastal communities. I grew up in a fishing community. I'm a third-generation fisherman myself. And I just want to mention that the Island Institute is not an organization focused on any one issue area. We're focused on community support and co-creating solutions to challenges and opportunities facing coastal communities here in Maine. And before we dig into some of the project work that we're involved in that I think is very germane to today's conversation, I wanted to set the context a little bit, talk a bit more about what the Institute is, and then talk a bit about the Maine coast. And the reason I want to focus on kind of setting the stage and describing some of the communities that we work with here is because I think the similarities between much of coastal Ireland and Maine are quite striking. So the Island Institute itself is a 38-year-old community development organization. We strive to support and sustain Maine's island and coastal communities and exchange ideas and experiences from elsewhere to further the sustainability of communities here along Maine's coast and all across the world. And you can see some of the kind of broad themes that describe our work here on the screen. And what we tend to categorize these in these three buckets, just like the complex communities with which we work, everything is connected. So our work on the marine economy touches on data and research, and our network work focuses strongly on leadership within communities. So our work is interconnected, just like the lives and businesses of the communities with which we work along the coast. And to talk a little bit about where we work, we focus on coastal Maine. Maine has 120 coastal communities, 105 of which are mainland communities, and 15 of which are island communities without bridges that sustain year-round populations. And Maine is also the most rural state in the US by the current census definition. We have 92% of our towns and communities have fewer than 10,000 residents, and 25% have fewer than 800 residents. And you can see many of our island communities are on the smaller side of things, and much of Maine's coast is defined as very rural. And to dig a little bit deeper into the data side of our coast, we've created three publications that really tell the story of Maine's coast in a very data-rich and data-heavy way. And I'm just going to preface the next slides that are coming. They're going to be very, very, very intricate. There's going to be a lot of information on here. Please don't try to read everything on here. I'm going to try to hit the high points, but I would encourage everyone to take a few moments and visit our website and review some of these waypoints documents, because they're an excellent source of information that can talk about some of the similar challenges that we're facing here in Maine, but also they can provide really good insights into how to tell a community story in a data-rich way that makes the narrative that sometimes is really valuable be more powerful in policy circles and in governmental circles when you have the hard data to back up the kind of story of community. So Maine's coast in a glance is a coastline of three main industries outside of education and the healthcare sector. And these really are arts, recreation, and tourism, the retail sector, and predominantly resource extraction. And along the coast, resource extraction is a fancy way of saying fishing and/or aquaculture. But by and large, Maine's coast is dominated by fishing, and in particular, the catching of the American lobster, Homerus americanus. But Maine is also a tourist destination, and the tourist economy is drawn here for a variety of reasons, from Maine's pristine coastline and our conserved lands to the iconic and culturally intriguing lobstering and fishing communities. But with this tourist economy comes incredible variability on the seasonality of employment and income, which causes a variety of challenges up and down the coast. But on top of this complexity of seasonality and reliance on fishing and tourism and associated businesses with both sectors, the majority of Maine's coast is dominated by self-employed folks. The US average for self-employment within a around 13%. Oh, can you hear me again? I think I've lost my earbud, so apologies if the sound quality.
No, we can hear you. You're doing fine, Sam. You're okay.
Maine is just above the national average, but when you turn to the coasts and islands, you can see we're approaching double the national average for self-employment. And many of the island communities that we work most closely with can be 3, 4 to even 5 times the national average of self-employment. And as a small business owner, as a self-employed individual, the resources that you have to draw upon and the ability to support yourself is vastly different than being part of an established larger company, and presents a variety of challenge. But it also presents a variety of opportunities for diversification along Maine's coastline. And I bring up this next slide because I want to talk a bit more about the business than just the business side of things. As I mentioned, our tourism economy is driven very strongly by the kind of pristine nature of our coastline, and conserving of land along the coast is of vital importance to maintaining that character. But with that being said, it can also present numerous challenges. As land is conserved, it becomes restricted from other uses, and this can be to the detriment of communities when it comes to housing, and in particular to access to working waterfront, which is the critical juncture between the land and sea upon which the marine economy relies. And it's not to disparage the conservation of land, but as you can see, some of our island communities that are heavily reliant on fishing are also approaching more than 50% of their land being placed into conservation, with one island in particular being 88% conserved land, which, as you can imagine, as a community trying to develop and sustain itself and address the challenges of the 21st century can cause some conflict. So now I've talked a little bit about the overall coast, and I wanted to introduce everyone quickly to one island community that kind of encapsulates Maine's coast. So hopefully everyone can hear the audio. I hope Mahal will ping me if not, but welcome to Vinyl Haven, everyone.
Yep, music coming in. Like that, no soap, no pets. Very good.
So thank you all for indulging me on that. I think it's important to demonstrate kind of the general theme of island life with some data that supports kind of the challenges that some of these communities face. And while it's impossible to sum up the totality of the Island Institute's work across the coast of Maine effectively in even a full webinar, I wanted to touch on 3 topic areas today, which I think intersect with the work going on at Udras on the northwest coast of Ireland. And that is our work on energy, our work on working waterfronts, and our work on diverse marine livelihoods, including fishing and aquaculture. So the windmill you see on the left of this is one of the windmills on the Fox Islands, which includes Vinyl Haven and its neighbor to the north, North Haven. We could go into the deep history of the complexity of establishing a wind farm on an island and the community relations that were required. But I'll save that for another day as our relationship develops a bit more. The middle section is a photo of a large-scale lobster boat engaged in offshore fishing here in Maine from the island, the Cranberry Isles near Acadia National Park. And to the left is a lobsterman hoisting up mussels off of his mussel rig that speaks to one of the programs that we instituted, which I'll talk a little bit more about in a minute. But to begin with, our energy work, we've had a long history of working with island and coastal communities that face very high energy costs on a variety of fronts, but most notably energy efficiency and renewable energy work. You'll recognize these 3 turbines from Vinyl Haven on a very foggy day. And increasingly, we've realized that our energy efficiency and renewable work has significant intersections with the marine economy. And here on the photo on the right is a picture of the Cranberry Isles Co-op with its brand new solar panels that power both itself and its neighboring restaurant. And this demonstrates kind of one of the first steps of a project that we're leaning into now, working on decarbonization of the seafood sector, recognizing that this sector is impacted intimately by climate change and also suffers from increased variability in its catches and in the energy and input costs, including things like bait. So recognizing that efforts to decarbonize a sector can not only provide carbon mitigation benefits, but adaptation benefits for the individual businesses, i.e. stabilized or reduced costs, which are critical for planning any business. Uncertainty is the bane of all small businesses. And putting efforts towards supporting the marine economy through energy efficiency work is one step to help meet the state's climate goals, but also to provide broad resilience to as many of the coastal communities that rely on this sector and these critical pieces of infrastructure as possible. And the reason why it's so important to make this connection between our energy work and the marine sector is just what a significant role the marine sector plays in the state of Maine. And here I say marine sector, but in reality, I'm talking about the lobster fishery. If you look at the 2 pie charts here, you can see a snapshot of our fisheries from 25 years ago, showing a fairly balanced mix between lobsters, urchins, shrimp, groundfish, and scallops, as compared to the latest data we have from 2015, where the giant Pac-Man is eating all of the other, the Pac-Man of lobsters eating the other species. So you can see that Maine has become significantly reliant on a single species, which is a pretty precarious position to be in, as the Gulf of Maine is documented to be warming faster than 99% of the world's oceans. You can imagine that the creatures that live within it are shifting and moving quite rapidly. So the potential future impacts on the fishery are significant and unknown broadly. So trying to bake in enough resilience into this system and to prepare these communities to be as adaptive and responsive as possible is critical. And part of our work moving forward is doing just that. And I can talk about that again in a few moments. But even beyond climate change, the critical piece of this story is the intersection between the land and the sea, known as working waterfront. And the state, we're lucky enough to have state-supported programs that can help preserve working waterfront. You can see two pictures here, a before and after picture of a fisherman's co-op that utilized a working waterfront covenant, basically a conservation easement that a working waterfront piece of property is able to sell to the state, promising that it will remain working waterfront in perpetuity in exchange for funds from the state for infrastructure improvements. And this has become a critical resource for supporting access for fishermen to the ocean, because Maine has over 5,000 miles of coastline, longer than the coastline of California, when you take all of the inlets, fjords, and islands into account. But of this more than 5,000 miles, less than 20 miles provide access to the working waterfront to the thousands of fishermen and women that make use of the sea every day. So while the state has programs in place, it's not enough. And as development or as land conservation occurs, it can take vital chunks of the working waterfront away from the communities. And regardless of whether they're fishing for lobster now or engaged in aquaculture or engaged in species that are yet to be determined within the Gulf, loss of working waterfront can spell the death knell for any community that relies on the ocean. And that's just some of the reasons why we put so many efforts into supporting the marine sector and connecting the dots between all of our work and the marine economy. It's for that and characters like this that spend their days out at sea, providing for their families and providing the backbone for their island and coastal communities. And this brings me to another one of the programs that we've recently wrapped up, but have developed into a much broader approach to our state's economy right now. And this is our aquaculture business development program. For the last 4 years, we've engaged fishermen in particular, or those related marine trades, in efforts to diversify their business portfolio from lobster fishing into various species of aquaculture. So to date, we've put more than 100 individuals through this training program, a very hands-on training program, and created a cohort of more than 100 individuals and 31 businesses, kind of a mini cluster within the state of aquaculture, of fishermen engaged in aquaculture as a way to diversify and to take some of those eggs that are placed in the lobster basket and put them in the basket of the burgeoning aquaculture industry here in the state. And in the grand scheme of things of the US economy, it's not significant, but these 31 businesses have already contributed around $4.1 million to the Maine economy, which is non-trivial for these coastal communities, and provides a model for how the fisheries of the future can look in many places. I've heard enough stories today to recognize that this is a model that's working very well in Ireland with fishermen that are engaged in a variety of different species. And it's just a matter of how we shore up all of those different endeavors in such a way that they contribute to a robust marine economy. And that leads me to the final project that I'd like to bring to everyone's attention today. And I'll spend a little bit more time talking about this as it aligns a lot with the cluster discussion today and builds directly off of our aquaculture business development program. So part of our rationale in wrapping up the aquaculture business development program, where we encourage fishermen to become engaged in aquaculture, was the realization that we could encourage and form a lot of businesses to support these fishermen and their coastal economies. But without a robust seafood economy at the state level and even feeding into the national level, these businesses' growth will be stifled. So how can we engage in work that builds out a robust marine economy that supports all of these coastal businesses, whether they're engaged in aquaculture or fisheries? So we're currently serving as a project manager for a 3-year federally funded program tasked with creating a roadmap and workforce development plan for Maine's marine economy that we're calling I Maine. And Maine is charged with providing support that will sustain and grow Maine's marine resource businesses, to increase the harvest and the value of marine living resources in Maine in a way that increases the competitiveness of businesses, maximizes the resiliency through diversification, and minimizes the carbon footprint of the seafood sector, all while maintaining and building out access to the working waterfront. And this is an industry-led effort. We have around 38 members of the steering committee from a variety of seafood-related businesses, from lobster organizations, lobster dealer organizations, large salmon aquaculture firms, smaller oyster and kelp aquaculture firms. And this is where I'm really excited today to be part of these conversations, because we're at the nascent stage of this journey, and efforts like UDRAS clearly provide a model that we can both learn from and also inform with our own experience here. So as we're working to develop this 10-year roadmap, we're seeking to import the wisdom from elsewhere that's so critical in informing these successful endeavors. And with that being said, I'll mention a little bit of how we work. So we seek to provide impacts within communities that not only address community needs and opportunities, but also are built in such a way that the lessons learned can be shareable, can be scalable, and can have influence and impact beyond their communities, the direct communities that we work with. And to that end, we've created our What Works Solutions Library, where we house the solution to common community challenges on a variety of topics. And you can see here some that mention and touch on some of our work beyond the marine economy in particular, but looking at dealing with safe and sustainable ferry services, preparing for sea level rise. And this, we hope, can serve as a clearinghouse for communities within Maine, but also elsewhere, to figure out strategies to best address the challenges that coastal communities are facing, but also the opportunities for developing robust marine sectors and making the most of opportunities like clusters, and for targeted investments in infrastructure that can provide robust and diverse workforce along the coast. And we are not blind. Not all good ideas come from Maine. So I ask my fellow participants and those observing today to weigh in and follow up with me. I encourage Michael and Mark to share my email address, and I can put it up again as needed. But one of the things we're really interested in these conversations is crafting these global networks that can share solutions and great ideas from one community to another. So a rising tide can truly lift all boats, and all coastal communities that are more similar than they are different can learn from one another and make the most of opportunities like clusters and like investments that UDRAS is making in the communities. So I asked to everyone, what is working for you? What has worked? What do you hope will work? And I hope this is an opportunity that I can add another location to that list of places we work outside of Maine. And I hope this is just one first step in a conversation across the Atlantic about how we support robust coastal communities moving forward. With that, I'll end a little early and open up for questions.
Thank you very much, Sam. That was fantastic and really on the ball. I mean, absolutely on the money in terms of stuff that we're interested in. And we would like to, for sure, continue that dialogue, because what you presented and the graphics and the way you presented them really are very, very relevant. You could say are a snapshot of some of the challenges, including this thing of conserved land in Kilkieran. Mark mentioned it earlier on, areas of conservation, the challenges for lobster fishermen and so on. A particular question is coming from another absolutely kind of, let's say, legendary Ireland community, the Shetlands, and from the one and only John Goodlad, who's listening to us. You may already be in touch with John, and if you're not, you should be. Thanks, John. But his question was about the role of fishing organizations or fishing communities in fisheries management. How central is that? You might just briefly talk about that, maybe go back to your own experience as a fisherman. Are they much involved in the regulation, the consultation? And then, I mean, the point is, here in Ireland, we don't have enough input from fishing organisations, but I've always been impressed with what you do in the Maritimes and in Maine. You seem to have got it better. Over to you.
Well, I think it's it's to the credit of my forefathers in the lobster fishery. But really, in broad brushes, we've had incredible engagement with the fisheries in the management of their resources, dating back decades and dating back before the federal government became involved in the management of a lot of fisheries. And that, I think, is one of the key attributes that has allowed the Maine lobster fishery to evolve and manage itself in a slightly different way. So brief history lesson, around the 19-teens and 20s, the lobster fishery in Maine faced a near collapse from overfishing. And in response, the fishermen decided to put into place a variety of conservation practices that proved successful and were able to inform a state management strategy that was in place before the federal government came in with the Magnuson-Stevens Act and started to manage all fisheries on a federal level. So we had the luck, as it were, to have forward-thinking fisher folk putting in place conservation and management practices that informed the state model and built out a robust state model that was in place and could inform federal policy rather than being informed by federal policy. And we currently have a co-management system where individual fishing regions are involved in the state management of the fishery. Its power and influence has waxed and waned over the years, and I think we're in a period where they may not be exerting the influence that they have, and they might not know that the influence they have built into this system. But that engagement with fishing communities is critical, and whether it starts with a conversation or more formal governance structures, I think engagement and interaction with that sector and taking them as seriously as possible can never steer you wrong.
Great. And just following on from that, Seamus Branagh was from Carna, from a fishing community which once upon a time had the pleasure of a visit from your colleague Brian Beale from Maine. And our regards to Brian and thanks for his good work on lobster conservation. But Seamus, who was involved in that kind of work, talked about this business of disconnect between small-scale fishing operators. You mentioned a lot of these folk are self-employed or, basically one-person shows. Talk about that maybe with your anthropology cap, Sam. How big an issue is that, and what can you do in Island Institute to try and bridge that disconnect, that gap?
So the ability of any individual, especially a sole proprietor or a self-employed person, to engage in some of these broader discussions around management or the future of their own fishery is limited by their need to make a living and to go out and to fish every day. So organizations like the Maine Lobstermen's Association, the Maine Aquaculture Association, and other kind of boundary spanning organizations like the Island Institute are here to help facilitate those conversations and provide the opportunities and to bring the table to the fishermen rather than bringing the stakeholders to the table, as it's so often said, and enabling those folks to have the voice, because it is that disconnect that can cause poorly informed, even though unintentionally poorly informed, management choices that can be to the detriment of any particular sector. So it's critical to have those organizations that can provide the opportunity to engage in conversations with fisher folk on the fisher folks' terms and on their schedules.
I'd be keen to continue the conversation, but I'm mindful of time, Sam, so we might just leave it with one last thought. Give our regards to Senator Susan Collins and tell her we're glad that she's abstaining next week. You know what I mean, I think.
Oh, yes, I very well.
That's very good. And best regards. And the waypoint documents that you showed on the screen, maybe if you might afterwards just send an email to Maura or Cliona, just attach a link to those three. They look like really good publications that are very relevant to what we're trying to do here. So thanks very much, and stay in